our honorable members. Joining us via Zoom is the following members. We have the Majority Leader, Honorable Ferdinand Martin Romualdez. We have Representative Adrian Ebcas, Representative Yasser Balindong, Representative Siriaco Gato Jr., Representative Aurelio Gonzalez Jr., Representative Sandro Gonzalez. We also joined today via Zoom by Deputy Speaker Jose Atienza Jr. and the Committee Vice Chairperson Johnny Pimentel.
Thank you, Comsec. Ms. Committee Secretary, Attorney, may we know who are our resource persons present today?
Mr. Chairman, for the information of the committee, we have the following resource persons joining us here in Nograles. From the Development Bank of the Philippines, we have First Vice President Rosemary Quilantang, the head of the Special Asset Group. Senior Vice President Rene Gailan from the Office of the Corporate Secretary. Attorney Evelyn Amiling, also from the Office of the Corporate Secretary. Vice President Romy Aguilar, the head of Construction and Facilities Management Department. We have the Chief Legal Counsel, Senior Vice President Attorney Soraya Ajong, and the Assistant Vice President, Attorney Patricia M. Osoteo, also from the Legal Service Group. From the Lopez Holdings, we are joined today by Attorney Enrique Quiason, the Corporate Secretary. From the Securities and Exchange Commission, we have Attorney Manuel Artiza, the General Accountant. From the Bangko Sentral of Pilipinas, we are joined here today by the Deputy General Counsel, Attorney Chofilo Gragadio, Director Mary Ann Cube, and Miss Katrina Ann Aldon. Via Zoom, we are joined by the President and CEO of DBP, Mr. Emmanuel Herbosa, the President and CEO of Lopez Holdings Corporation, Mr. Salvador Tirona. From the Philippine Investment 1 and Philippine Investment 2, we are joined here today by the Chairperson, Mr. Carlos Gaudencio Manyala.
For the information of our members and guests, the public can view this hearing at the Facebook page of the House of Representatives. Good morning, honorable members of this committee and to our invited guests and resource persons. In today's agenda, the committee will resume its deliberation on House Resolution 1040, principally sponsored by Representative Claudine Diana Bautista. The resolution called for an inquiry in aid of legislation on the alleged loan condonation or write-off of DBP, Development Bank of the Philippines, in favor of companies controlled by or affiliated with the Lopez family. Today will be the third hearing of the committee on the congressional inquiry pursuant to House Resolution 1040. We have called again the resource persons from the previous hearings to elucidate on issues that our members have sought clarification. Additional resource persons deemed necessary by the committee were invited today to provide the members with information and documents that will be relevant to shed light on the testified transfer and assignment of loans of the Lopez companies under Republic Act 9182, otherwise known as the Special Purpose Vehicle Act of 2002. Pursuant to the mandate of the Committee on Good Government and Public Accountability, we will look into the violation of Republic Act 9182 and other related laws in the disposition of the non-performing loans of DBP, and whether concerned government officials and employees have committed malfeasance, misfeasance, or nonfeasance thereby. The committee will also determine whether the disposition of the subject non-performing loans unduly benefited any entities or individuals that was prejudicial to the Philippine government. In the final analysis, the committee resolved to settle these issues as to guide us of the appropriate remedial legislation and to safeguard public funds. During the previous hearing, the committee ordered the issuance of subpoena duces tecum to the DBP to submit the following documents. Number one, list of companies or conglomerates that were borrowers of the 9.556 billion in 2006 total non-performing loans that availed of the SPB law. Number two, list of companies that are now presently non-performing amounting to 7.5 billion pesos. May I know from the committee secretary the status of this subpoena?
Mr. Chairman, for the information of the committee, we have received the compliance of Development Bank of the Philippines yesterday, and it was submitted to us, the hard copy as well as the soft copy via email. And they submitted the list of companies, conglomerates that were borrowers to the 9.556 billion pesos total DBP non-performing assets for the period 1989 to 2006. And the list of companies, conglomerates that are borrowers to the 7.5 billion pesos total DBP NPA for the current year. These documents were uploaded to the Google Drive of the committee, accessible to the members. Your Honors.
Thank you. Please provide the members with this submission. To move along, there is we invited a couple of new resource persons for this hearing. The only one to comply or to go here in lieu of this invitation is Mr. Carlos Gaudencio Manialac, Chairman of Philippine Investment 1 and Philippine Investment 2. Mr. Manialac, are you present?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is Carlos Manialac for Philippine Investment Companies.
Is it all right that we administer the oath to you because that is a normal procedure in this committee?
Yes, Honorable Chairman.
Okay, Comsec, please administer the oath to Mr. Manialac.
Teacher.
Yes,
Congressman
Honorable Gonzalez.
This is before the oath of our resource person. How can we get the list of the copy of the conglomerates we have loaned in DBP?
The list is now in the possession of the secretariat. She will provide your staff. It is
My
now
email, okay.
Yeah, in the Google Drive, but hard copies can be delivered to your office, Honorable Gonzalez.
You can send the copy in my email so that I can read it. Comsec, alam naman yung...
Yes, we will do it now.
Thank
sir.
you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Manialac.
Mr. Manialac, please stand and raise your right hand. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth before this congressional inquiry, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Hello, good morning, Mr. Manialac. We have already finished 2 hearings, but up to this time, we are in a we have some gaps in the story that we need to be filled because the only thing that DBP remembers is selling these loans to the SPV to PI1 and PI2. Do you have an opening statement so that you can fill the gaps after it was sold to you in 2006?
Yes, Honorable Chairman, if I may, I can just give you a summary. And if you have specific questions, of course, we would be more than happy to answer. We did submit to your office yesterday afternoon our preliminary position paper, which contains the information that we have to date, we were informed of the invitation late on Friday. We have worked intensively to get as much information to you as possible, so that information is contained in our preliminary position paper. Of course, we are open to questions, and then we do have other information around the loans, as the DBP had said, although those are bound by confidentiality. So if we are released from the confidentiality agreements, we would be more than happy to share all of those information to the committee. Perhaps just as a backgrounder, the DBP assets that were bought by Lehman Brothers were generally managed out of the Philippine Investment Office. The small exception to that was a small number of loans, including the Lopez Group loans that were managed out of the Lehman Brothers Hong Kong office. However, we have been able to get much information on the handling of these loans. We do not have all of the information, but the accounting records, some of the accounting records, the initial files, we do have in our possession. The current management of Philippine Investment was not present when these loans were purchased or resolved. The current management was put in place in 2011 when Philippine Investment Company was bought out of the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy in New York. But again, we have exerted every effort to collate all of the information, which we will be more than happy to share with the committee. It might be helpful, sir, if you can direct me as to what facts are most interesting or most urgent, so that with the information I have, I can talk about those facts.
Yes, since the parties, I think with the confidentiality aspect of this, the parties concerned are both amenable to share the information. I think the Lopez Group, formerly Bempres, is here represented by Mr. Tirona, and here DBP is represented by the present president, Mr. Herbosa. So we would like as much information as possible, because I think even though you said that you were not involved in this particular loans because Hong Kong Lehman Brothers handled it, the information is vital for the success of this hearing. So the first thing I will ask you is Philippine Investment 1 and Philippine Investment 2, is it a subsidiary of Lehman Brothers Asia? Or
It used to be part of Lehman Brothers, Honorable Chairman, and it was set up to purchase these types of assets in the Philippines. These are SPAC companies. During the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers, eventually these companies were put up for sale by the New York courts in the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy proceedings. So this was bought out of bankruptcy around the period 2010, 2011. So it used to be Lehman Brothers. It is now 100% Filipino owned.
who is the current owner?
It's a series of shareholders, including myself, sir.
Okay. So your opening statement did not do a lot to this committee of its purpose. So I guess I have to ask you that you are under oath, and the committee members will further interpellate you to shed light on this transaction. So last question for me before I give it to my members. Did the 4 loans, as you may be aware by now, were they paid by the Lopez Group or the succeeding companies like Manila was bought out by the DMCI and the Pangilinan Group? Were they already paid, all those 4 loans to PI1 and PI2?
As far as the records that we have indicate, sir, they were resolved or sold through the 2007 and through 2010 period. There were two loans, the Benpress loan and the buy and tell loan that were eventually bought by foreign interest. But the records indicate that through various payments, all four exposures were paid off over time, and they are no longer in our books. We have some of the pricing and collection information, if that will be useful to you.
Yes, it will be. Can you share it with our secretariat after the hearing?
Yes, sir. We will do so.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Manyalak. Please just relax during the progression of this hearing. I'm sure that there are a lot of members who would ask questions. Thank you for your time. We now recognize the Honorable presence of Honorable Mike Defensor here at Nograzes Hall. By Zoom, the Honorable Angelo Barba, the Honorable Ed Christopher Go, and the Honorable Deputy Majority Leader Tyrone Agabas. Next to the first to interpellate is our sponsor, Representative Michael Defensor. Good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to everyone. Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to first ask Mr. Manyalak. Mr. Manyalak, good morning po, and thank you for obliging the committee. Maraming salamat ho. Dito po sa inyong contract on the asset sale and purchase agreement, one of the things that were part of the agreement, yung pong pinagkaisa nyo dito, was the definition of certificate of eligibility. And very clearly, nakalagay po rito sa inyong agreement that there should be a BSP certificate of eligibility for all the loans, that non-performing loans defined in the SPB Act. Ito po yung agreement with Lehman Brothers Development Bank of the Philippines in the DBP sealed bid public auction of non-performing assets. Is it correct to say that yung pong agreement inyo, as part, on your part, that you required the Development Bank of the Philippines to ensure that an eligibility will be given to the loans that will be put in this special purpose asset vehicle? In your case, Philippine Investment One, Lehman Brothers.
Honorable Defensor, the intent was, as with the assets that were purchased through the SPB Act, the intent was to try to get as many of the assets with the COE. It's actually much easier for the buyers if there is a COE certification from the BSP. However, we did recognize upfront that the COE process would involve help from the BSP and also with SEC. And so there was always the possibility that we would not get COEs for all of these assets. For the Lopez Group loans, particularly, my reading of the documents we have seem to indicate that around the time of signing, we were hoping to get the buy and tell in the, I think it's the Maynila purchase with COEs. Subsequently, as we have reviewed the documents, it looks like only the buy and tell asset was able to be COE eligible. The people I've spoken to in PI have stated that for the other two loans, it may have been because these borrowers were in negotiation with their creditors at the point in time when the purchase was made, and so they could not have gotten COE eligibility. There was also a timing issue. I think you needed to have been non-performing in 2002 for you to have been COE eligible. So we did attempt, from a buyer's perspective, it's much easier if we get an assets that COE eligible, but in many cases, we do not get that COE certification for the sale.
Yes, Mr. Manalak. So is it correct that in the actual contract you have, nire-require niyo po sana ang Department of Development Bank of the Philippines to ensure that there will be a COE? Because I see now the contract and I've been reading through it. Malinaw po doon na nakalagay na dinefine ninyo a certification of the BSP that the SPV Act, eligible RAPOA, and NPL should be transferred subject to in accordance with the SPV Act.
Yeah, yes, sir. I think I think we need to make a difference between the transfers to an SPV and getting the COE. So again, the intention was to try to get the COE as much as possible. But that did not turn out to be the case. In fact, there is a provision somewhere in the contract if in fact the COE was never obtained as to who would bear the transfer cost. So it was already considered that we may not be successful in getting the COE. But again, the intent was, from the buyer's point of view, to get as many of these assets under a COE as possible.
Mr. Manalak, I'm sorry in saying this, but if you knew the law at the time and you had, if I'm not mistaken, due diligence studied by Ernst & Young, and I'm sure that you have your own legal, and you allowed such knowing that it is not compliant with the law at wala pong ibinigay ang Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas na eligibility, pag ni-reverse po natin to, in a way, there could be a conspiracy with the private sector and the DBP. Because from my point of view, yung pong Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas did their job in working on it. Because there were many studies conducted by Ernst & Young during that time and other groups making those studies. And they very well know that there are legal parameters in the selling of accounts to the private sector.
Sir, the obtaining the COE was basically a burden of the seller working with the BSP. So again, the contract actually contemplated the possibility that if you were to apply with the BSP and eventually you did not get a certificate, that was a possibility. Again, from our perspective, we wanted a certificate. We paid the price as if we were going to get a certificate. But in at least one instance in this in the Lopez Group loans, we thought that we were going to get a certificate. We did not, for reasons that I do not know at this point. We can research further as to why we did not get the COE. But in at least one instance, there was an expectation that we would get a COE, but we did not.
So, Mr. Manalak, you were made to believe by DBP that those accounts, those loans, can be transferred to your SPV, Liman, Philippine Investment One, without need of eligibility. Yung pong eligibility, for your own consumption and for your interest, but DBP, in their presentation, qualify that there may be accounts that are not eligible and can be transferred to the special purpose vehicle.
Yes, sir. As far as I understand, there are means outside of the SPV Act to transfer such credits, assignment of credits under the Civil Code. And our understanding was that if in fact an asset was not transferred with COE certification under the SPV Act, then there would be other legal measures by which we could make that transfer.
Mr. Manalak, not to, this was a long time ago, but would you know what process they mentioned aside from the SPV Act?
We do know, and even almost on a daily basis, there are purchases of credits and loans in the banking sector, in the finance sector, assignment of credit act, et cetera, et cetera. So this is fairly commonplace. The only difference, Honorable Defensor, is that under the SPV Act, you would be eligible for many benefits if you in fact did your transfer under the SPV Act, and especially with COE certification. So if transfers were made that did not have COE certification, then you would need to go to the civil code, and the benefits under the SPV Act would not apply to your transfer.
Thank you for that, Mr. Manyalak. Yung pong pag-transfer ng rights and assignments of rights, yes, it could be done easily within the private sector. But in government financial institutions, meron po kasing parameters on the book value. And I recall during this time, in fact, even earlier, Ernst & Young made a study of the National Home Mortgage and Finance Corporation. And in fact, they knew that we were constrained by certain parameters. But I'm not pointing at your company. You just made a bid, and it was the responsibility of DBP to make sure that it was eligible. But I just want to know for the record, did they made you think, or they clarify that there are other parameters which you mentioned under the civil code which can be utilized? Was that the information given by DBP?
That was the information given by DBP. Also, I'm certain, I don't know the details, I'm certain by our counsel, for all of these contracts that we sign, Honorable Defensor, of course, we're very careful that we abide by the law. And I'm certain, I don't know the provision right now, I'm certain that under these contracts, there's a due authority clause where the seller assures us that they have the proper authority to transfer the assets to us.
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Manyalak. In fact, yun nga po yung minimension ko kanina, dahil dito po sa inyong contract mismo, you made sure and that there was a certification of eligibility, and of course, may warranties po. Kasi alam ko naman, and I understand, that being in the private sector and you do a bid, of course, kailangan po malinaw that all legal parameters, all compliances are done. So that's correct, Mr. Manyalak, and I thank you for that. Ang pangalawa ko pong tanong, Mr. Manyalak, if you don't mind, yung pagkakabili po, first on the 9 billion, on the total amount of 9 billion, how much were you able to, the 9 billion was sold to you at 3 billion?
That's what the record shows, sir.
Okay, so that's about 30 cents to a dollar, more or less, 35.
Yes, po.
At ito pong pagkakabili sa inyo, would you have in mind, in total na lang po, how much were you able to sell it back to the creditors? I mean to the owners of the accounts or the borrowers?
Honorable Defensor, if we're talking about the entire portfolio, I don't have that number with me, particularly because there are many of these accounts that are still outstanding. There are actually many accounts where we haven't paid, we haven't gotten a single centavo. So we continue to work on these accounts. If you are interested, I do have roughly the numbers for the Lopez Group loans, if you want total collections on those numbers. But on the 9 billion, I don't have that with me. I do know that a considerable number of those loans are still in the process of attempted collection, and there are quite a few where we haven't gotten any kind of payment at all since the purchase of these loans.
Yes, thank you for that, Mr. Manyalak. And most of these loans, I mean, yung po na naiwan po sa inyo are mostly ropowas na po. May mga real estate pa kayo na nandyan and you're trying to sell more or less, Mr. Manyalak.
That is correct, Honorable Defensor.
Dito po sa Lopez loan na Mr. Manyalak of the 1.6 billion, magkano po nyo, okay, you maintained the borrower, of course the respective Lopez group of company, and then eventually there was a exit for them. Magkano po yung pagkakabili ninyo na 1.6 billion pala when you purchased it from DBP?
The total consideration, I'm looking at some of the numbers now, sir. The total consideration was 1.069 billion for the 1.66 billion face value loans. So it's about, as DBP had spoken earlier, I think it's about 64% of face.
Sir, question lang ho. Bakit po parang ang taas dito sa Lopez loan? On average, you have a 30%. Bakit po sa kanila nasa 64%?
I think that when we walk through some of the collections, iba-iba po yan, ano, when we look at these types of loans, there are loans that are completely unsecured with companies that have absolutely no ability to repay, and those would be even single digit sometimes. So when we look at these portfolios, especially for exposures this large, we would look to the ability, the inherent ability of the borrower to repay. So you will find that, or if you will remember, these loans from the Lopez Group were actually sold in auction. There were maybe 4 or 5 participants for these auctions, and the prices seemed fairly close. So I think we had arrived at a market clearing price for each of these Lopez Group loans.
So if it's sold at 64%, ito na po, personal na po to,
Yes,
from your investment banking point of view. At 64%, kung kayo po may hawak ng loans na to, hindi nyo ibibenta. Ibig sabihin, these are still very, very potential collectible loans.
Yes, sir. What if I may put myself in DBP shoes, because they were the seller and we simply bid in their portfolio.
Yes, sir.
Ang nangyayari po niyan, because they, under the SPB Act, most of the banks, if not all of the banks, were capital constrained at that point in time. So na-realize po nila, kung ibibenta nila isa-isa yan, ang mabibili lang talaga yung may ability to repay, yung may collateral, yung may guarantee, yung may payment ability. And that was why I think also based on the Ernst & Young and ACRA advice to DBP, and this is what happens globally, sir, they would package these loans in portfolios na merong magaganda, makabayad, at merong alanganin. Because if they don't package that way, ang mabibili lang po sa kanila, yung magaganda, ang may iwan sa kanila the worst credits, which will make banking life even tougher. So I think, and if I understand correctly, the way DBP did this, they took an advisor and said, this is the best way to package this. Ihalo-halo nyo, merong maganda, may pangit, para yung bibili. They have no choice. Now, among the portfolio that we had bought with the Lopez Group loans, meron po talaga, as I mentioned, meron kaming 9-figure loans ngayon na hindi pa nababayaran, but these were some of the better credits within the portfolios that were sold by DBP.
Yes, I agree, Mr. Manyalak. So in the cherry picking of accounts, nasa high side yung Lopez accounts, sold at 64%, which basically, and you're correct, I agree with you, kung ako po ang DBP, hindi ko binenta. Ngayon, my next question would be, Mr. Manyalak, kasi po dapat ma-foreclose na sila ng DBP. Pero hindi ho sila foreclose. When it was transferred to you, what was the term or how long were they able to fix the issue?
My understanding, just looking at the cash flows that came in, Honorable Defensor, was that we basically, or these loans were basically held almost as passive investments. And the reason for that is that 2 of the loans were already in rehab. And I think a third one, Central CATV, was either in restructuring or in rehab. So in that situation po, the creditor becomes very passive, ano? Yung rehabilitation receiver says, oh, ito, pwede ka na magbayad or hindi ka pwede magbayad. So we, as the owner of that credit at this point in time, will be simply receiving any cash flows approved by the court. And then in certain instances, such as may NILAD, or in this case, buy and tell, eventually, I think must have been in the 2008 through 2010 period, merong buyer of the debt or merong buyer of the company and says, look, bibilin ko na lang exposure mo. But if I'm looking at these loans, and given the experience we had with some of the other loans we have, based on the records, it looked like these loans were managed very passively. Meron nga pong rehab, so naghihintay na lang kami. And then may dumating na buyer, sabi, oh sige, ibenta nyo na. There are some loans not including these, in the business that are very intensively managed po, ano, na tinatawagan nyo yung account holder, anong masisettle, anong collateral nyo, pwede nating, do you need more liquidity? Based on the records, is looking at some of these cash flows and the fact that these companies were mostly in rehab or under restructuring. These were passively managed because of the nature of the credit, sir.
So Mr. Manyalak, more or less, from the transfer to the SPV, nabigyan pa sila ng about 3 to 4 years to fix or to recover the loans.
Yes, sir. It looks that way. It looks like the collections were basically around the 2007 to 2010 period.
Yes. So Mr. Manyalak, from you bought it for 1,069,000,000, magkano nyo po na ibenta?
Yung total collections po, no, yung total collections, I just want to speak globally because hindi pa po pino yung information namin, ano. But
yes,
we are trying to find.
Yes.
Yung based on the records that we have, the total collections on the Lopez group of loans from DBP was about 1.25 billion. There was, if you look at the Annex A of our position paper, ang total na nakuha po ng Lehman from the Lopez group loans is 1.45 billion. But apparently, and we just traced this late last night, if you look at our annex, there is a column at the very bottom, Central CATB. It looks like there was a purchase of Central CATB from a third party, sir, aside from DBP, where there were additional collections. So the collections from the DBP Lopez Group loans was about 1.25 billion. If you want, I can go quickly to how much was collected for the Maynilad in Central CATB, sir. These were mostly, by the time the whole process was finished, these were paid at around par, so around 100%, maybe slightly less or slightly more. Yung Maynilad po at yung Central CATB. Yung Benpress, the total collection for Benpress was about 60% of the face value. And the total collections for Buy and Tell, which is the second largest exposure, was about 30% of face value.
So yeah, thank you, Mr. Manyalak. If I may, Mr. Manyalak, di naman po, you don't have to answer, but the narrative of what happened was, so maganda, 64% itong accounts na to, the 4 Lopez accounts. And in fact, DBP, yung pong ginawa nila, made a separate board discussion to put together the Lopez accounts. Again, it was also to package the entire thing. Mr. Aguilar was there as part of Credit Committee Assistant Manager. They were discussing it, and then later on, they put it as part of the 9 billion. Nilagay na po dun sa 9 billion para mapaganda yung buong package. So instead of foreclosing, because of the 180 days, nilagay po sa SPAB ninyo, which wala naman po kayong kasalanan. It was a business deal. Due diligence was conducted by Ernst & Young. You made a bid. But by doing that, you extended the loan for 3 to 4 years. Sometime to 2010, nabayaran po lahat yan. And technically, yung binili ninyo 1.069 billion, naibenta nyo ng 1.25 billion. So, si government lost about 600 billion pesos. But from what you're saying, if only government waited, Maynilad and Central CATV would have gotten 100% of what was loaned, of what was borrowed from them, and maybe more. So ito po yung kabuuang kwento, Mr. Manyalak, of what transpired. Is this correct? A correct narrative of what transpired?
Honorable Defensor, I would, because again, from our records, it looks like these assets were passively managed. Hindi naman po to, as far as we know, walang kumatok sa Lopez Group. No, we were in rehab. These loans were in rehab. So you're correct in the sense that if the DBP had waited on the resolution of these loans, they seem to have basically paid for themselves over the 3-year period. The only other consideration I would make, sir, is that maybe if the DBP loans were not part of the portfolio, then they may not have gotten the pricing that they got on the other portfolio, sir. Kasi kung wala yung maganda, maybe mas mababa yung bid namin doon sa completely non-performing loan, sir. Yun lang po.
Yes, I understand. Yeah. So thank you, Mr. Manyalak, and I apologize for bothering you with these questions. But what you pointed out are the points that you raised, and the facts that you gave us are very enlightening. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, sir. And then we would be more than happy, as I said, to cooperate as much as possible with the community.
Thank you, Mr. Manyalak. Mr. Manyalak, you were leading from your briefer there. Can we get the purchase data on the numbers of the 4 loans, if you can provide the committee? Because I read your briefer, so that's the only thing we need additional, the documents.
We will. We can provide that as soon as the meeting ends, sir. If that's okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. We'd like to acknowledge the members present. Leader Boying Remulyo, who's also the vice chair of this committee. Representatives Joe Jimenez, Vice Chair JJ Suarez, Representative Samantha Vargas Alfonso. Is there we have and Representative Sara Jane Ilago. Is there anybody who wishes to interpolate?
Mr. Chairman, kung wala, kung pwede yung magtanong na rin ako sa DBP.
Sige.
Again, for the record, Mr. Chairman, sila Mr. Bosa po is in Zoom, no? This was not the DBP of today. I just want to clarify. Ito po'y patagal lang nangyari.
15 years ago.
15 years ago. So may we get a statement from the DBP based on what Mr. Manyalak mentioned? Oh, Mr. Aguilar, last time sinabi mo you were part of that, and this was yes, he was the assistant manager, and this was a winning proposition. Now you have the investment banker already saying and explaining to us what happened. And ako, nasasyak ako. I saw the presentation of Mr. Harry Roque. Mukhang may mali si Mr. si Secretary Roque ng kaunti kasi parang ang laki ng projection niya sa kinita ng Lehman Brothers. It turns out nasa mga 180 million lang naman ang kinita ng Lehman, which is an acceptable amount given the investment banking Diba, Mr. Chairman, nung huli po, sinabi ko, nagkaroon ng 144 million na waiver on the MWS.
Yes. It's based on the minutes of the meeting of the
Yes,
board.
Mr. Chairman. Ngayon, Mr. Aguilar, what were the other accounts wavered? Ano po yung may mga binigyan nyo pa ng waiver ng penalties and defaults?
Yung pong, unahin ko po muna yung Maynilad. Last week po, sabi ng Maynilad na pag-aari na ng DMCI and Manny Pangilinan Group. Nagkaroon po ng debt and capital restructuring. Yung pong binanggit nyo rin last week, konektado po yun doon. So yung lahat po ng bangko, nagkaroon po ng condonation ng penalties at saka at saka lahat po ng mga saka yung pong interest rate doon, inalign lahat. So ang una pong nakinabang dyan sa debt and capital restructuring ay ang gobyerno. Kasi po nagkaroon po ng reverse privatization ng MWSS. Lumabas po yung Lopez Group, pinayagan po ng MWSS at nagkaroon po ng malinis sa balance sheet ang Maynilad. Yan po yung yun po yung konektado sa bilasan nyo na transaction na inapprove ng Board of Directors.
Okay. Yung debt and capital restructuring, sa ibang creditors, wala tayong pakialam doon.
Kasama po ang DBP kasi doon sa debt and capital
I
restructuring.
agree with you.
At covered po yun ng rehab court order na ganyan po ang mangyayari sa mga utang ng...
Pero ang ibig ko sabihin, may nangyaring factual. Nagkaroon kayo ng condonation ng penalties and defaults.
Pursuant po sa debt and capital restructuring agreement na approve po ng rehab court.
144 million.
Opo, inuulit ko po, ang qualification po doon, meron pong court order tungkol sa debt and capital restructuring.
Walang court order. Nagkaroon ng court case ng rehab. Yung creditors, pumayag sila for a debt and capital restructuring. Ngayon kayo mismo, sinabi sa inyo, meron ng DCRA, gawin din natin to, i-waiver natin. So tama, yung 144 million, kinondone ninyo.
Opo.
Ano pa yung debt restructuring? Ang tanong ko lang, Mr. Aguilar, ano pa ang pinayagan ninyo na magkaroon ng penalty and non-condonation?
Maaari po ang bayantel kasi pareho lang po ng rehab.
Mr. Aguilar, huwag mo sabihing maaari kasi kasama ka sa gumawa ng recommendation. So don't say maaari.
Covered din po yun ng rehab court order.
So that was for buy and tell. Factual muna tayo. Magkano yun?
Hindi ko na po matanda.
Alam na alam mo lahat. Ngayon, bigla mo nakalimutan. Ikaw nga yung nandun sa credit committee. $400,000. You were the ones who recommended it.
Opo.
Oh,
Kasi po yan.
Ano pa?
Wala na po akong matandaan.
So ito lang, itong dalawa. So of all the resource persons here, ikaw lang yung involved. Di ba? As assistant manager, unless meron pa dito, para lang klaro.
Doon po sa bulk sale na sinasabi niyo?
Yes. Yung lahat ng mga loan discussions, yung was Attorney Adjong there when these things were being discussed?
Mr. Sorry to interject. Remember our last meeting, we agreed that the board during that time will be invited.
Yes. No, sir.
Details for 3. The others, we don't, I think it's fair enough that we subpoena everybody because they are one board.
Yes. And technically, Mr. Chairman, we can issue the subpoena to the corporation, to DBP itself.
To produce them, those people.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Because DBP is an institution which is...
Are you
If that's the motion of the,
We're talking about the
Former
board members.
15 years ago. Who
15
approved
years
this? Approved this transaction to be sold?
For those who
And
three
give
who
the-
received our invitation, we issue a subpoena and we issue another invitation to those who we haven't contacted yet.
Yes. So is there a motion from the Honorable Remulla?
So Mr. Chairman, that we issue a subpoena to the three who received the invitation but did not show up, and another strongly worded invitation to the
Others.
others, Mr. Chairman. I so move.
Is there
second, Mr. Chairman.
there is a motion duly seconded to issue a subpoena ad testificandum to the three who previously already agreed to attend but did not do so. Is there any objection? Hearing none, the motion is approved.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Honorable Defensor.
Yes, if I may continue po yung tanong kay, so dalawa lang po, no? 144 million, Maynilad, $400,000 buy and tell. More or less. Hindi naman po kailangan eksakto.
Ano natin papareceive yung tatlo? Si Ma'am Yagas yun.
Chair?
This is
Would I, Mr. Chair, if I can get a response from DBP?
DBP.
The waiver, sila po yung nag-approve eh. I mean, sila yung nag-recommend. So I just wanted to ask, dalawa lang po ba? Maynila, 144 million, which we presented in the board resolution, nandun po sa minutes, and buy and tell $400,000.
Po, yan yung buong syndicated loan.
Yes.
Kasi 20 million lang po yung exposure namin sa buy and tell.
Okay.
So yung buong trans po nung syndicated loan, baka yun po sinasabi nyo na 400.
So what study that yes, you will allow a waiver. So meron pa hubang kasama na ibang companies? Are there other companies involved? Wala na po ba? For the record, Mr. Chair, can they speak on the mic?
Wala na po akong matandaan ko doon sa mga Lopez group na.
Okay. Ngayon meron ho akong hawak na minutes to the Management Committee, Credit Committee from the head marketing sector and from the head marketing, yung pong branches sector. Noong June 1, nagkaroon po ng approval of list of NPAs and other assets for the bulk sale, investor fee, and authority to sign bulk sale related documents. So kabuuan na ho to. Kung ano yung bibenta, magkano yung fee sa gumawa. Nakalagay po dito sa minutes ninyo, as agreed in previous TWG meetings, Technical Working Group meetings, with Ernst & Young, TASI, NPLs involving government entities are excluded from the bulk sale. ROPAs that are targeted for possible joint ventures with property developers are likewise excluded. Is this correct from legal?
Attorney Jong.
Ang pirma po nito si EVP Armando Samia and EVP Jesus Guevara.
Mr. Chair, with all due respect, we have to refer to the records, Mr. Chair.
Can you give copies of that document? They don't have copies in front of them.
I will have this reprinted. This was just given to me recently. June 1, 2006.
Wala pa sila dun eh, pero we can get copies so that they can confer with their records.
Mr. Chair, if I may ask, is there another government agency who made a study on this? On all your loans? Kasi yung binabanggit ni Secretary Roque are very detailed information. May we know? From the CORSEC, from the legal? Who can answer? Or kay Mr. ano po? Mr. Herbosa?
Mr. Bosa, good.
Ano pangalan?
Mr. Aguilar, do you have a reply? Is there any other government entity that reviewed the transaction before it was approved?
It was only Ernst & Young assisted by ACRA.
No, government agency.
Wala po.
Sa ngayon,
Wala rin po.
wala daw.
Would you know? Legal, CORSEC? Okay, because any release of document would go through your board, correct? So, only documents given here to the committee are allowed.
To be submitted to the honorable committee, allowed by our board of directors, pursuant to our policies, Mr. Chairman.
And Attorney Garland, there was no other government agency who made a study on this.
I have no complete information in order to.
What do you mean no complete information? You have information but not complete?
I was not present during those meetings or during the deliberations on those matters, Mr. Chair.
So, maaring meron.
I was only the CORSEC for 1 year only, sir.
So, it may be that you're not aware, but there may be information because you're CORSEC and you would know the minutes of the meetings of the board
Yes, sir.
as regards the documents.
I cannot categorically confirm, sir, or deny it.
Oh, kasi po, yung binabanggit ni Secretary Roque, medyo ano po yun, tama po yung direksyon niya. Tama yung kanyang sinasabi. More or less, kasi hindi na niya nakuha yung figures ni Mr. Manyalak, but now that he's heard of it, mabibigyan niya ng linaw kung ano yung naging proseso at magkano talaga na ibenta. Again, no, if just for the record, kasi tama, Attorney Garland, dahil nagsalita si Mr. Manyalak, ang pagkakabenta nyo, ang account niyo is 1.66 billion at binili sa inyo ng 1.069. No, ang sabi ni Mr. Manyalak, na ang value nito is 1.66 billion. Nabili nila ng 1.069. Naibenta nila more or less ng 1.25. Pero hindi niya alam yung details pa eh, but more or less this is the picture. So would that be a correct yung pagkakabenta na lang, hindi niya po alam yung 1.25 eh. Yung 1.66 nabili sa inyo ng 1.069. Mr. Aguilar, would that be correct? $1.66 billion ang inyong total Lopez accounts na ibenta nyo ng 1.069.
So you want 1.7.
Okay, sige, 1.069. Pareho na rin yun.
Opo.
1.66B.
Nabenta po ng more than 1 billion. 1.
Okay, so that's for the record para lang ma-confirm natin yung binanggit ni Mr. Manyalak. So okay, nandun ka sa credit committee bago ko pumunta dun sa next point ko. Why would you sell? Hindi naman masamang account to talaga totally. In fact, Mr. Aguilar, if you had foreclosed it in coordination with MWSS, pwede nyo pa siguro na ibenta ng mas malaki.
So Doon po sa issue ng foreclosure, wala pong pwede foreclose kasi clean loan. Second is, as I said last week, naglinis po ng libro ang DBP. So just to ma-clean up po, nagbenta kami ng more than 9 billion worth of non-performing assets.
Clarification lang, Mr. Chairman.
Please proceed, Honorable
Thank you.
Remulla.
Si Mr. Aguilar, no? Ang total DBP NPL sa Lopez Group was 9.556 billion. Tama ba?
Ay, mas mababa po.
Ano, ito yung package pala.
Apo.
Ito yung package, 9.556 billion. Ito, ibinenta nyo sa Lehman Brothers Asian Investment Limited for 3.83 billion. Yung utang na yun.
Tama po.
Magkano naging loss ng DBP dito?
Hanggang 5.
Magkano nawala sa DBP? 5.8 billion? 5.9?
5.7 po.
5.7 billion ang nawala sa DBP dito sa package ng 9.556 billion. Ito lang ba binenta nyo sa SPAV?
Yan lang po.
Ito lang. Ngayon, ano epekto nito sa bangko pagka ginawa nyo na nagbenta kayo ng non-performing loan for a discount? Ano epekto nito sa equity ng bangko?
Okay. So sa equity po, dahil covered naman po ito ng allocated reserves, konti lang po yung loss na nag-impact sa equity.
Pero
Ang maganda pong nangyari dito, tulad po nung nagkaroon po ng liquidity ang bangko, meron po kaming almost 4 billion pesos. Pag nire-invest nyo po yon, kikita po, kesa po yung buong 9.
ang ibig sabihin, dito sa pagbebenta nyo, may lugi na kayo. Nalugi ang bangko. Ang sinasabi nyo, dahil may pera ulit na pumasok, pwede nyo palakihin ulit yung perang pumasok.
Tama po.
Diba? Pero nalugi ang bangko sa
Na pwede pong
sitwasyon na to.
ma-recover out of the proceeds of the sale.
Oo. Ngayon, ang utang ng Lopez Group sa DBP magkano? 1.66 billion?
Mga ganyan
Mahigit.
po. Opo.
Madam, course, sa COMSEC natin, magkano raw ang sa record natin? 1.66 billion. So, ang total exposure sa Lopez Group was 1.66 billion ng DBP. Tama yan?
Tama po.
Mr.
Aguilar po.
Aguilar, no? Itong 1.66 billion, ito yung cash out na lumabas sa DBP o kasama na rito yung interest at penalties?
Principal lang po.
Principal pa lang to. Magkano dapat ang interest at penalties dito bago nyo ito ibenta? Kasi binenta nyo ito na malinis, pero ibig sabihin, dahil naging na NPL siya, actually, mas mataas ang book value niya ng umpisa. Tama?
Ang book value po yung
May default yan, di ba?
hindi po.
Past due.
Opo.
Oh. Gano'ng katagal naging past due ang utang na to? Gano'ng katagal hindi nagbayad ang Lopez Group sa 1.66 billion pagkakautang sa DBP? Gumalaw ba ang utang o hindi gumalaw? Mula na sila yung utang.
For Maynilad po, ang dati lang 1 billion pesos na loan, nung ibenta po 711 million na lang.
711 yung tinatawag na Maynila to.
Opo.
1 billion naging 711.
Opo.
Oh.
Tapos covered po siya ng book reserves na 200.
Ano ang coverage siya ng?
Book reserves for allocated allowance for losses.
Hindi ko tinatanong yun. O sige, ano pa? Ano pa yung sumunod dito? So Maynila to.
Opo.
Ay, yung Central TV.
Central CATV po.
CATV. Principal.
260 million po yung
260. Magkano binenta to?
nung binenta po siya, ang OPB niya po ay 206 million.
206. So nawalan kayo ng 54 million dito. Ang DBP nawala ng 54. O tapos ang Benpress.
Ang Benpress po, 250 million ang pisa.
Principal to, principal.
Opo. 158 million po nung ibenta ng 206.
Okay. Tapos yung ano pa yung natitira?
Buy and tell po.
Buy and tell.
$20 million po yung isa.
So, 1 billion din to.
Nung binenta po 11.58 million na lang.
Pagkano to, $20 million.
Opo.
11 million na lang.
58 po.
58. Kaya magkano ang naging talagang exposure dito? Kasi pag sinuma ko to, magkano ang peso no sa dollar yung panahon na yun?
Mga 592 million po. Pesos.
30 plus pa lang ang peso nun?
More or less. 20.
Hindi pa 50. Hindi pa umaabot sa 50 ng panahon na yun. Ang alam ko, umabot na ng 50 ng panahon na yun. Mag-56 pa nga eh. Diba? Yung $20 million ng panahon na yun, 56 nga yung, naging 56 nga ang trato ng panahon na yun, di ba? $204. So 97, ito yung tinamaan ng Asian crisis. Attorney Kiasa, may recollection ko rito. You were already corporate secretary at the time?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Sa Bayantel kayo rin? Hindi.
Yes.
Oo. Magkano noon ang dollar noong 1997? Yung inutang to, 1997? Anong year niya inutang tong Bayantel? Itong $20 million. Mr. Aguilar, magkano? Anong taon?
Sorry.
1994.
5 po.
1995.
1985.
Oh, so hindi pa bumabagsak, wala pang Asian crisis ng panahon na yon. Kaya 30 plus pa lang noon, di ba? 36 pesos pa lang yan, ano? 35 pesos. O wala pa? Mga 28 pesos pa lang noon? Ang dollar?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I can recollect how exchange rate was then.
Oh, pero around the time yan, Mr. Chairman, no? Ano yun? Nag-56 siya, mga 2002. Pero to 1994, wala pang 30, no? Mga 28 lang siguro yun. Kaya ang trato nyo magkano? 500 million? 500 magkano? 592. So, kung 592, ang trato nun, 24 pesos lang. Ang panahon na yun. 1995. So, ang total exposure talaga rito, yung 1.66 billion, actually, iba yung peso, iba yung dollar, di ba? Iba yung peso, iba yung dollar. We just compute sa peso, so lumalabas ka 1.66 billion. Pero kung sa real money ngayon, yung sa Bayantel, 1 billion na yun, di ba? 1 billion na yun. Kasi mahalaga lang ito, gusto ko lang malaman sa DBP, gumalaw ba itong mga utang na ito? Nagbayad ba sila ng interest? Sinervice ba nila? O totally clean to, no? Wala tong, this was given clean. Wala kayong collateral, Attorney Quezon? Hindi kayo nag-collateralize?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to refer the question to Mr. Tirona, who's on Zoom.
Mr. Tirona, was there any collateral for these loans? DBP, baka kayo sagutin, DBP. Clean ba to?
Yung Central CATV po may may chattel mortgage.
May shuttle mortgage. Ano shuttle mortgage ng Central CATV?
Yung outside facilities po nila, yung mga alambre, mga facilities.
Oh.
Yun lang po.
Yung iba wala, yung Maynilad,
Bayantel po, ganun din po yung collateral.
meron din sila collateral pero mga
shared po with other creditors.
So malinis to. Hindi pa niya sinasagot. Kanina ko pa tinatanong, mula na inutang tong 1.66 billion, meron bang naging movement ang Lopez Group na nagbayad sila, sinervice ba nila for so many years o hindi?
Meron pong collection before the sale.
Magkano ang naging nakolekta sa kanila? Sa cost of money pa lang. Para malaman lang natin, to be fair. Kasi gusto natin makita kung naging regular ang process ng banking, kung yung ginawa nyo sa Lopez, ginagawa nyo rin sa iba, kung yung pabor na binigay nyo sa Lopez, ginagawa nyo rin sa iba. Yan lang.
For Maynilad po, ang total collection po namin bago magbenta, 889 million pesos.
But this is debt service, itong collection nyo. O di gumagalawang principal debt service lang to. 889 million.
Gumalaw po siya kasi
Yung principal ba nabawasan?
nabawasan po katulad po ng Maynila. Dati 1 billion, naging 711 million na lang po.
So, na-servicean nila. Hanggang kailan nila na-servicean ang mga utang na Maynilad? How long?
203 po November.
Kailan nagsimula ito? 1996? 1995?
2000 po.
2000. So, 889 million ang kanilang binayad. Nabawasan lang siya ng principal ng 289 million. Yung si ATV, itong Sky Cable.
260 po umpisa.
Oh.
Naging 206 na lang.
Oh, magkano ang na-service nila rito?
Total of 21 million po. More or less.
21 million na service na binayad nila. 21 million. Pero, paano naging 206 yun kung 21 million lang ang binayad?
Ayun pong
Nag-payment sila ng principal?
21 million po. Principal and interest po yun. So,
21 point, ano yan?
3 million po.
0.3. Principal and interest to.
Opo.
Pero from 260 naging 206. 54 million pinag-uusapan na pagkakaiba. Paano yan? How do we account for that?
Tanong ko lang po ulit sa accounting namin. Pero ito po kasi yung nabigay sa amin.
Hindi malinaw ha? Hindi tayo malinaw dyan ha? Sa Benpress, yung 250 million naging 158 million. Magkano binayaran ng Benpress to sa debt service? 250 million yan eh.
245 million po.
245
Million. Principal and interest also.
So, ibig sabihin, ano to, may penalties na to na binabayaran sila?
Wala po.
Wala pa yan, service, straight debt service yan.
Opo.
Oh. How about buy and tell? Paano nangyari yung naging 11.58 million na lang? Nababayad din sila.
Nagbabayad din po.
In pesos or in dollars? Ano ba?
Dollars po.
Dollars. Oh.
Kulang-kulang pong 14.6 million po binayad.
14.6.
Principal and interest.
Okay. So, gusto ko lang malaman kasi, no? You're in the business of banking. How do you arrive, maybe this is to Mr. Herbosa, no? At the decision to grant a clean loan to any client. Paano nyo nagagawa, nabigyan ng clean loan ang isang umuutang sa inyo? Mr. Herbosa? Is Mr. Herbosa still around?
Yeah. Good morning to all your honors and thank you for the privilege to get me on board. The question is, why are we granting on a clean basis?
Yes, ang gusto ho namin kung ano ho ang
Yes,
sa pagbibigay ng clean loan. Kasi karamihan ng mga umuutang may collateral. Bakit ho dito clean loan ho tayo? Wala ho tayong hiningi na collateral. Ano ho ang prosesong to, Mr. Bosa?
Yeah, Honorable Boying. In DBP, ever since and today, we are governed by what you call the 5 C's of credit. The important C of the 5 credits, 5 C's of credit is character. Sino ba talaga yung pinauutang ninyo? Kasi kahit na meron niyang condition, the other C in credit, or meron niyang huyang capacity kasi magaling ho negosyo, O kaya ho may collateral ho yan. O kaya kahit may kapital, pag ayaw magbayad sa inyo, hindi ho magbabayad. Ang mangyayari dyan, hatakin kayo sa hukuman. So what's important really, and which we uphold even in the banking industry, is the foremost C, which is character, the 5 Cs. You see what happened in this case. So let me answer first. Therefore, what is very important here is the project viability. Ano ho yung business at sino ho ang paano nila babayaran yung loans nila. So like in the case that we have right now, what we put a lot of weight is not actually the collateral, it's actually the business and how it may be affected by condition. So in other words, what we carefully looked at, the bottom line is the project viability. Will this project succeed? Will this business continue to succeed? Dapat ho, malaman namin, sino ho yung mga off-takers nila? Sino ho ang mga customers nila? And we also have to look into that as part of the... Yes, sir. Tama po yun. Congressman Boying, tama po yun. Cash flow. You've got to make sure that the cash flow is positive. Now, I'm glad that the team here facing you showed to you that, in fact, the ingredients were there for the Lopez loans at that time. From 1995 all the way up to the Asian financial crisis. So in other words, the Lopez companies before the Asian financial crisis were experiencing very rich positive cash flow. Kaya nga po, nababayaran yung utang and interest that were due. Now, at the time, 2006, and like today, as I expressed in the previous congressional hearing, we were overtaken by events which affected the other C in the 5 Cs, which is the condition. The Asian financial crisis was what we call a systemic development that affected a lot of the companies in Asia, and most especially here in the Philippines. So that's why I said that the BSP at the time, hoping to protect the banks and in order to keep the business going, promulgated the SPV, which was the law of 2002. Di ba? So that at that time, when we were overtaken by events beyond our control, then as I said, and I'll quote myself again, what could have been garbage, we were able to recover 64%. And that's the way I would simplistically describe the SPV math po. So even if we have reserved for loans, to your point, so that our equity is not impaired, kasi fully reserved na po yan eh. What we had hoped for is to recover something from a zero total loss position. So as I said before, that we sold the garbage to Lehman through PI1 at 64%. How they turned it around, I don't know, but that's a challenge at the time. But for me, DBP did right and all the other banks did right by virtue of the law, which allowed us to recover something, and it was 64%. So with that 64%, it gave us and the other banks a lot of liquidity or some liquidity for which we can invest in a faster horse. Meron naman po dyan, as you know, mga counter-cyclical businesses, di ba? There are the businesses that thrive in a crisis situation. And I'm sure, I wasn't in DBP, but I'm sure that their board and their management were able to reinvest it po. So I think that's the way that we probably should put it in context. And again, I think we are seeing the repeat of this in this pandemic situation. And I'd like to say to all your honors, to this honorable court, that I am grateful that you have passed the FIST law, which will enable all the banks to help the MSMEs particularly to recover. And you have done something very significant that will do well for our economic recovery. Salamat po sa FIST law.
Ang mas giving ko lang sa fees law, very simple eh. Kasi ito na naman tayo, yung malalaki pagbibigyan natin. Pero ngayon, yung mga bangko parang wala to sa hearing, no? Pero malupit lang na sila sa mga maliliit. I think we all know that. No? Yung mga OFW natin ngayon na
Hindi makabayad na ng housing.
hindi makabayad ng housing, ay talagang tinatakot ng bangko. Ayaw nilang, kasi maliliit na borrower, di ba? Tapos itong fees law, yun lang malungkot dito. Pagbibigyan na naman natin yung malalaki na hindi naman hindi naman bumababa sa ilalim sa retail banking yung epekto ng fees law. Yun lang malungkot dito.
Yes, with the indulgence of Congressman Limulya. Mr. Bosa,
Yes, sir.
doon sa inyong paliwanag, sinasabi po ninyo na, yun nga, the context of what transpired.
Yes, sir.
Opo. Ang akin lang ho naman, ang hindi ko maintindihan, no? Bakit parang maraming naging shortcut doon sa paggawa ng pag-aayos ng mga Lopez loan? Sabi nyo kanina, hindi naman yun dahil sa collateral kahit hindi binigyan ng Maynilad. Agree. Sige ho, maganda yung business. Meron kang monopoly, duopoly sa pagbibigay ng tubig. Ikaw lang ang may control. Kasama mo ang Ayala sa kabilang banda at ikaw naman yung may-ari sa kabila. Pero ang usapan ninyo doon, magkokolekta kayo within 1 year. At dahil doon, nagkaroon kayo ng guarantee ng joint solidary signature. And yet, hindi nyo ginawa. Wala akong nakitang ganun. In the process of eligibility, sinabi na ng Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, huwag nyo itong ibenta, itong dalawang to. Pero ginawa pa rin po na ibinenta. Kanina narinig naman natin si Mr. Manyalak. In fact, dapat nga hindi na siya imbitahin dito dahil sa private side siya. Yung binenta nyo 1.66 billion, tinanggal nyo na yung waiver ng penalties and defaults, ang nakolekta lang natin is 1.69 billion. In 3 years time, nakabawi naman yung mga kumpanya. So, I don't understand the logic on this. And, I will call your attention, Mr. Rebosa. June 17, ang inyong legal gumawa ng study on calling the guarantee of Ben Press. What happens, sabi nung legal, if DBP calls on the Ben Press guarantee now, will this extinguish Maynilad's obligation to the bank? Sinabi ho dito, malinaw. Hindi. We can call on that. Meaning to say, kasi Mr. Bosa, from the private banking point of view, naintindihan ko yung binabanggit ninyo. Pero from the government financial point of view, talagang nakikita ko yung mga shortcut at yung pagbibigay dito sa loans na to. From 10 billion to 3 billion. Huwag na muna natin sa amin Lopez loan, yun ang sa total, no? From 10 billion to 3 billion at yung pinakamagandang loans ninyo, ibinenta ninyo at inilipat. That I cannot understand. Kasi nung nangyayari po ito, Mr. Bosa, nagkaroon din kami sa National Home Mortgage and Finance Corporation. Ang gumawa din ng study, Ernst & Young. Yung mga loans namin na kumukolekta na 70% and above, hindi namin binenta. Hindi ho namin binenta dahil alam namin may recovery. Pero yung 69% and below, kasi nga yung parang pinaka high side na niya ho ata is about 60% and below. Yun ang pinabayaan na namin. Based on the study of the Ernst & Young, but seemingly in this particular case, and I'm looking at all the studies conducted, nagsalitan ang inyong legal, yung credit committee, TWG and Ernst & Young, sabi huwag niyong pakialaman yung those that have contracts with the government corporations, huwag natin ipasok dyan. And yet, ginalaw. Hanggang ngayon, Mr. Bosa, walang mapakita na letters on foreclosure or call on guarantee. Wala akong makitang dokumentong ganyan. So, I agree with you that it was to liquefy or to give support to the banking sector. But seemingly, in this particular case, something is wrong with the loans sold by DBP to the SPV. Mr. Bosa.
Mr. Chairman.
Sir, thank you. Thank you. You're not,
Sa COMSEC natin, kung may breakdown tayo ng 9.556 billion na NPLs na binenta nila? Meron ba tayong breakdown? O Lopez lang alam natin.
Hindi, meron.
Mr. Chairman, from the submission of the DBP, we have only the list
Yes.
of the
But no
companies
amounts.
included in the 9.556 billion. But
Mr. Chairman,
the breakdown of the number.
while we're checking for the documents, I think Mr. Bosa will reply.
Yes, Mr. Bosa, you're recognized.
Sir, I just want to say, you're not going to see any notice of foreclosure on the Lopez loans, for that matter, the NPLs that were sent to the SPV, because there's no condemnation of the loan. It was a true sale. And also, may I again repeat the clarification by the BSP that when you sell to the market at the time without benefit of the certificate of eligibility, that's legal. The certificate of eligibility under the SPAB laws gives you tax exemption. Now, BSP is very, very strict to make sure there are no freeloaders. Kaya nga po,
Point of order.
ginawa
Mr.
ko
Chairman,
nila,
point of order.
if I may finish.
Point of order.
Yes, Mr. Bosa, I don't think you are to judge what is because the law is very clear. There has to have eligibility. What you are citing is the implementing rules of regulations that they made as part of the SPV Act. But the SPV law is very clear. The BSP is here. Ang legal po na nandito. And they're saying that if you put it in the SPV, there should be compliance on the law. So I don't know.
May I just thank you, Congressman. But may I just dispute your point? The certificate of eligibility gives the seller the tax exemption, but does not prevent the seller to go into the secondary market. I think maybe, sir, to end the discussion, we can have the BSP again clarify it.
Mr. Bosa, magkakaroon lang po ng linaw yan sa korte. Once we make the committee record and the ombudsman will file a case, dyan makikita kung sinong tama sa atin.
May I remind the sponsor and the resource person to address the chair in your response.
Sorry.
So that we avoid this.
Yes, sir.
You know, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman,
Mr. Chair.
I apologize. Mr. Chairman.
I also apologize.
Si Mr. Barbosa kasi, pinababayaan ko yung mga salita niya because he was not part of the process before. Pero kung magsasalita siya dito on a statement of law, palagay ko mali. Kahit nga yung BSP sinabi niya I cannot judge whether it's legal or not. Let the courts decide. Pero ngayon, he will insist on a point and dispute the law. Kaya nga sinasabi ko, huwag tayo magdebate dyan. I will allow you. Pero if you will stand by yung statement mo on the law, sige, pag-usapan natin yan pag nag-file kami ng case. But I tell you 100% mananalo yung posisyon namin. It is not a question of eligibility. Pag dinala nyo sa batas, sa SPV law, you comply with the law. Yan ang sinabi ng Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, hindi sa akin yan. Attorney Lagadjo, tama po ba? Pag ginamit mo yung SPV law, dapat may eligibility sa Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas.
As of the last meeting, Mr. Chairman, with regard to the incentives, to the exemptions and the privileges granted under the SPV law, then you must have the certificate of eligibility.
Kung wala.
If you do
Kung
not
wala
have,
at ginamit mo yung SPV Act, kung wala at ginamit mo yung SPV Act, legal ba yun o hindi?
Again, Mr. Chairman, I will not say it's legal or illegal.
Sorry, yes.
What I can say is that in that case, there is non-compliance with the requirements of the SPV law. But then with regard to the privileges and to the tax exemptions, then you cannot make use of those privileges if you do not have the COE, Mr. Chair.
Yes. Pero tama po ba, Attorney Lagadjo, for the record na lang, absolute ang provision ng SPV Act. Yung law mismo wag yung implementing rules and regulations. Absolute that any account or loan, and if I may read to you the SPV law, para lang ho klaro for the record. Section 12, Article 3, transfer of assets to SPV. Letter B, the transfer of NPAs from a financial institution to an SPV shall be subject to prior certification of eligibility as NPA by the appropriate regulatory authority. Ibig sabihin, sinabi ninyo na non-performing asset siya, non-performing loan siya.
This provision, Mr. Chair, says that the transfer of NPAs from financial institution to an SPV shall be subject to prior certification of eligibility as NPA. So the use of the word shall is mandatory in that sense that if you are going to make use, again, as I've said, of those privileges and tax exemption, there has to be the certificate of eligibility.
Do not add to the provision. Ang sinasabi niya, di ba, subject to prior certification of eligibility.
Yes, Mr.
Tama. Ngayon, ba't tayo nagkakagulo, Mr. Chairman? Kasi later on, gumawa sila ng implementing rules and regulations. Ang sinabi nila dito sa Section 12, yung binabanggit nila na, eto yung muna Section 12, Notice and Manner of Transfer of Assets. Ang sabi niya dito, that all an FI that intends to transfer its NPA to NSB shall file an application for eligibility of said NPAs. Sinabi niya rin dito sa implementing rules and regulations, pero kinwalify niya sa kanyang definition dito. Sabi niya, a certificate of eligibility refers to the certificate issued by the appropriate regulatory authority as to the eligibility of the NPL or OPOA for purposes of availing of tax exemptions. Sa definition of terms tayo nagkagulo. Pero yung batas, malinaw. Absolute. Kailangan nagkaroon kayo ng eligibility. Ito nakakatakot, Mr. Chairman, kasi nagkaroon na naman tayo ng fees. Yan ang una natin bantayan. Ang pangalawa natin bantayan, which did not happen here, in fairness, marami sa mga may utang, bumubuo ng sarili ng SPAV. Tapos ibibenta doon, bibili nila mas mura. In fairness, wala naman ako nakita dito na nangyaring ganyan. But is this not correct? Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, marami kayong nakikita mga ganitong at least movement in the industry. Yung utang niya 1 billion, binili ng SPAV ng 500 million, siya rin pala yung nasa likod ng SPAV. So nagkaroon siya ng diskwento sa kanyang utang. So Mr. Chairman, again, I apologize for that. Pero wag muna tayong magsabi dito ng illegal dahil kung ako tatanungin, illegal yung nangyari. And simple lang naman yung aking sinabi. Magtanong kayo sa Pag-ibig. Magtanong kayo sa National Mortgage Finance Corporation, GSIS, SSS. Hindi sila makabenta na mas mura not unless meron silang SPV. Dahil may book value, magkakaroon tayo ng graft and corruption. Parang yan, Mr. Chairman, sa lupa ng gobyerno. Di ba magbibenta ka ng lupa ng gobyerno, 1,000. Ang sinabi nung ginawang market study, hindi mo pwede ibenta ng 900. At kung meron ka pa ngang, sa record pa nga natin sa gobyerno, whichever is higher, the book value of the land, kung 1 billion na yung lupa, or the fair market value, whichever is higher. Grabe yung ating gino-govern dito, kaya hindi pwedeng lumusot to. For the private banks, however, pwede. Diba, wala naman tayong pakialam sa kanila eh. A bank now will sell it, yun yung sinasabi yung transfer of credit, assignment of credit. O yung utang mo sa akin, ibibigay ko sa kabila. Pwede yun, pero tayo hindi. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Honorable Defensor. Next to interpellate is the Honorable Joe Jimenez of Zamboanga City. Congressman Jimenez.
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Chair. Let me state. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me begin by stating a fact na na-experience natin. Mahirap magtanong sa committee na to, mga issues and concerns natin, considering na yung mga dokumentong pumapasok din minsan a day before the hearing. So para sa akin, medyo yung time to prepare nababawasan din po sa atin. And secondly, gusto ko lang din ma-emphasize sa committee natin na malinaw ho sa atin, I think except for some bank officials, in particular to DBP, ng Pablo, tama po rin sinasabi ni Kong Mike Defensor, hindi lang pinag-uusapan dito yung tax incentive, kundi po pinag-uusapan din dito, sinasabi ng batas, kung ano yung mga requirement na dapat sundin, especially ng state-owned banks natin bago po pumasok sa mga transaksyon na sinasabi natin. Napakalinaw kung ano yung mga requirements, kung ano yung mga conditions, kung anong essentially unang-una yung declaration of policy ng batas natin. And I just wonder why, Mr. Chairman, and how, for example, ang DBP, they can apply the law to some transactions, pero in their own, they can also decide to set aside the SPAB law to other transactions. So yun po ang medyo malabo dito. And what's very clear to all of us, especially when this hearing began, is that out of the 9 billion pesos na pinautang ng DBP, ang nakolekta lang nila is by way of sale is more than 3 billion pesos. If that is not grossly disadvantageous to the government, then I do not know what it is, Mr. Chairman. So kanina I support the motion for subpoena of Kong Remulla. But let me just clarify, Mr. Chairman. Isa sa mga personality sa transaction na ito na controversial is po yung Lehman Brothers. If not for the position paper, if I'm not mistaken, coming from Chairman Manyalak, until now, we do not know kung ano talaga ang naging participation ng Lehman Brothers, what do they gain from all this. So ang tanong ko lang po, kasama ba sila sa subpoena for invitation? Any representative? I know nagsara na po ang Lehman Brothers.
One is already here. Is now in the Zoom. Congressman Jimenez, they can answer. He can answer for you your questions. He's now here.
Okay po. Yes po. And just to clarify lang po to DBP, I have a question to DBP. They're saying na wala hong condonation sa transactions na ito, pero a while ago we heard na mayroon palang condonation, mayroong write-off na ginawa. I don't know in particular kung ano yung transaction na sinasabi nila. And DBP is also saying na, if I get it right, 64% ang nakolekta nila. Where are these facts coming from, Mr. Chairman? If it's very clear to us, sa taong bayan, na again, yung punot dulo ng kontrobersiya nito is that sa 9 billion na pinautang ng DBP, 3 billion lang or more ang nakolekta nila. So can we get a straight fact from the DBP to begin with, Mr. Chairman? Ano ho yung transaction na sinasabi nila may condonation po?
Yung
Mr. Chair, may I the questions of the honorable congressman?
I think because I think he was not
Yes, sir.
involved in the previous hearings.
Yes, sir. May I just
He wants to know why it happened. The 9.6 billion was why it came to that point that it was sold to 3 point something billion.
Mr. Chair, as explained in the position paper submitted by DBP to this honorable committee, what happened was that DBP transferred or sold all of these assets or accounts to first Lehman Brothers, and then subsequently PI1 and PI2 assumed the rights of Lehman Brothers. Now, the 9.55 billion, Mr. Chair, is the total value OPB of all the accounts sold to Lehman and then PI1 and PI2. 3.88 billion is the bid submitted by PI1, Lehman Brothers, and later PI1 and PI2 for this portfolio of assets, Mr. Chair. So I hope I answer the questions of the honorable congressman.
Hello, Congressman Jimenez, do you have any follow-up question?
Yes po. Again, yun po ang naging source of controversy natin. More than close to 6 billion pesos ang nalugi po tayo sa pinautang po ng DBP. And yung second question ko po, it was made mention earlier na may condonation po sa mga ilang transactions. May we know kung anong transaction po?
I think that the interest and penalties yung condonation. Di ba? Tama ba? May ano yun eh. May board resolution eh.
Sir, Mr. Chair, I think the question is with respect to the specific accounts na po, indeed as presented, and the records will show that there were condonations. However, it was
condonations on what?
Of penalties. Yes.
Penalties.
Yes, sir. However,
may question ako. Si Lopez Group lang bang binigyan ng condonation ng penalties during that time, that period? Or there are other companies?
We are sorry, Mr. Chair, but we cannot provide the information.
So until you come back to me with your official answer, I would presume sila lang. So until you rectify that, we will put that as part of the report, our committee report. Because that's the only evidence given here by the Honorable Defensor that there were waiver of penalties and late fees charges. So if you can, in the next hearing, if you could further research during that period from 2001 to 2006, is there any other company given waiver?
We will do that, Mr. Chair, to the best
but
of our abilities.
let me warn you that if you do not give that answer, I will put that part of my report, committee report.
We will do our best,
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
So, Congressman Jimenez?
Yes. We have a representative from Lehman Brothers po.
Yes. He is Carlos Manyalak. Sir, Mr. Manyalak, Congressman Jimenez would like to ask a few questions.
Yes, sir. Ready for questions.
Yes po. Just to guide this representation po, yung loans, without going to specifics po, magkano po ang biniling loan ng Lehman Brothers po from DBP?
Yung tinatawag po na principal balance was 1.69 and then the purchase price was 1.06. This is specific, sir, to the Lopez Group only loans.
Well, siguro just to cite an example na lang din po. And from your yung binili ninyo, magkano ho ang nakolekta naman po ng Lehman Brothers sa loan na to, reaching 1.69 billion pesos?
The total collections po from all of these loans over 3 years until either sold or resolved was approximately 1.25 billion from the DBP portfolio, and there was an additional 200 million on the central CATV, but that asset was bought from a third party separate from DBP po. That's what our records indicate. So 1.25 out of the DBP Lopez Group portfolio is what our records are showing po in terms of collections, total collections.
So yung collections na sinasabi din po, took how many years po?
It was from the date of the purchase, which is 2007, until 2010. The only potential exception, there may have been a little bit more collections from central CATV. Our records are not clear, but the aggregate total, which is 1.25 billion, is complete. Yan na po talaga yung nakuha sa lahat ng loans.
So just to clarify, 1.69 ang value nito, and ang nakolekta ninyo po is a total of 1.450 billion.
1.25 from the DBP portfolio, and there was an additional 200 related to the central CATV loan. But that was from a separate seller po. Kasi po at that time, nagbebentahan na sila yung exposure na to.
So that the extra 200 million pesos, just to be clear, we will not include it in the 1.69 billion.
Yes po, correct.
So it only took you 3 years to be able to collect 1.250 billion.
Correct po. Yes, correct.
Which brings us to the point, Mr. Chairman, as earlier stated by the leaders of this committee, also by Vice Chairman Remulla, by the sponsor of the resolution, Kong Mike Defensor, and of course, yung chairman natin, Kong Mike Aglibay. Kung naging patient lang po siguro ang DBP to a certain degree, and siguro mas marami tayong nakolekta from the 9 billion pesos. Just look at the facts given to us by Lehman Brothers. They were able to collect more than what they paid for only it only took them 3 years. So kung ang palagi natin sinasabi ng dahilan ng DBP for doing all this is because of the Asian crisis noon, I wonder what will happen sa panahon natin ngayon, Mr. Chairman, considering that we are also under crisis. And yung sinasabi nating fees law, how it will be applicable, especially sa mga malalaking korporasyon, is yet to be determined. And sana naman po, yung fees law natin hindi naman maulit na to some transactions i-implement natin, i-adapt natin, pero to other transactions mukhang sineset aside natin. So that will be all in the meantime, Mr. Chairman. And maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Honorable Jimenez. For the second round of the sponsor.
Very quick, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Honorable Defensor.
Kasi po nabuo na natin yung benta ng DBP, magkano yung pagkabenta niya, pagbenta ng Lehman Brothers. I don't know how to place this question kasi alam ko madaming creditors no ng ang Lopez Group of Companies, but if Mr. Quezon will be amenable, just a quick question. Binili niyo po ulit itong loans ninyo from Lehman, di ba ho, ng 1.25 billion. Doon lang po sa Lehman.
Mr. Chairman, it was settled. Hindi ko na binili.
1.25 billion.
I don't know the amount. I'm not very sure about the amount, but Mr. Tirona, who's on Zoom,
Okay,
will be able to.
if Mr. Tirona can quickly reply.
Mr. Tirona.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. Could you please repeat the question just for me?
Yes, Mr. Tirona, we just wanted to clarify. You were able to buy all the loans at 1.25 billion from Lehman Brothers?
No, I'd like to correct that. We did not buy the loans from Lehman Brothers, Mr. Chairman. We settled the loans with the SPV. Okay, it was a repayment to the SPV.
Okay, so settled po to ng 1.25 billion.
I will have to double check on that. But the loans for Maynilad and for Sky, I think were 100% repaid under the restructuring and the rehabilitation. I'll have to check on the buy and tell recovery. But for the Ben Press, we confirmed that we were able to settle at 60% of the face value of the LTCPs.
Opo. So ang kinaklaro ko lang po, no, of the 1.25 billion na sinettle nyo po sa Lehman Brothers, it covers 100%.
I think 1 billion 600 1 million 1.06
1.069, Mr. Chairman.
Hindi 1.2.
Hindi po. Ang Lehman po ang bumili. 1.25 po ang pagkakabili nyo kay Lehman. Ang pagsisettle nyo.
Hindi, 1.06. Yun ang sinabi.
No, Mr. Chair, Lehman Brothers bought the loans at 1.069. So si Lehman po yun.
Hindi. 1.2 si Lehman.
Hindi po.
Ha?
Apo. Mr. Chair, kasi di ba siya po yung bumili Tapos si Lopez Group of Companies, sabi ni Liman, na
Tama,
ibalik
tama.
ang
Tama.
naibenta
Sorry.
niya ng opo.
Sorry.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So naibenta niya po ng 1.25 billion. I mean from the point of view of Liman. From the point of view of Lopez, nasettle niya po at 1.25 billion. Tama po, Mr. Tirona?
Iba-iba pong settlement, no? But if
Aggregate na po.
with your permission, I'd like just to give a breakdown, Mr. Chairman.
Yes po.
Okay, so if we concentrate on the Benpress outstanding LTCPs, the amount was 157.95 million. Okay, and we were able to settle this at 95.3 million, which is roughly about 60% of the face value. For the buy and tell, based on the rehabilitation, of which DBP participated in the rehabilitation, but eventually the rehab court approved a rehabilitation based on what they called a sustainable debt and an unsustainable. And that was completed or fully paid for the loans bought by the SPV under the rehabilitation of buy and tell. For Maynilad, the amount in the rehabilitation was roughly 810 million less an upfront payment of 72 million. So that's about 700 something million, which was again repaid through the rehabilitation of Maynilad. For the Sky, Your Honor, I'm sorry, but I cannot give the exact data. My colleague, Mr. Ventosa of Sky Cable, who was not invited today, but he was present during the last meeting. But I understand that that has been fully paid.
Okay, so yeah, Mr. Tirona, ang sabi nga po ni Mr. Manyala kanina of the Lehman Brothers, of the total loans, you were able to settle 1.25 billion. So parang nangyari, I'm not sure if you treated this as a package, na ito yung pagkabili nila, o isettle nyo na lahat. So you itemize how it was settled, but basically it was 1.25 billion.
Mr. Chairman, it was not a package. It was an individual company that went through the repayment of the loans. No? Like in the case of Benpress, it was Benpress that negotiated with them, and we reached an agreement for the settlement. For buy and tell and Maynilad, those were through the rehab court.
Okay, so the question now is, magkano nyo po naman after you settled all this, how much were you able to sell it? Based on this perspective lang ng Liman, wag na po yung ibang creditors ninyo.
Sir, why will we sell it? We settled the loan. We paid for the loan. Those
Yes.
are our loans. So we did not sell it.
Mag-focus po tayo sa Maynilad. Na-settle nyo po yung 810, di po ba? Ay, yung 710.
710 was part of the rehabilitation, yes.
Okay, magkano nyo po naman nung inayos nyo at naibenta nyo?
Hindi po namin binenta yung loan na yun because that was under the rehabilitation.
Yung shares nyo po, under Maynilad?
Under Maynilad, under the rehabilitation, we had to exit Maynilad and turn over the company to MWSS, who then reprivatized it. And it was MWSS that was able to do the reprivatization for the new owners. So we did not sell the loans.
Okay, ito po naman apples and oranges. Hindi wala naman pong comparison. So how much were you able to sell the shares?
We did not sell the shares for Maynilad, Your Honor. What we did was we surrendered our shares and we effectively took a write-down of our equity and advances in Maynilad, amounting to 4.4 billion. So we did not sell the shares. We just had to surrender the company or surrender our shares so that we could exit the company.
And for buy and tell, which ganun din po ba nangyari? Because ito po Maynila is different dahil meron siyang franchise with the government. But in the case of buy and tell,
For the case of buy and tell, the rehabilitation program was ongoing until a third party offered to buy the debt being held by the creditors of buy and tell. We were not involved in that offer by the third party, Your Honor.
okay, Mr. Tirona, one question lang po. Bakit po doon sa Maynila yung joint solidarity signature natanggal po yung guarantee ng BENPRES on that?
Actually, the recommendation, first of all, Mr. Chairman, that was a decision by DBP and the other creditors. No, our surety was called on. Now, the court receiver actually was the one who handled the conditions needed for the rehabilitation of Maynila. We were not involved.
But of course, you agreed na matanggal po yung joint solidarity signature, of course, no? As a business business proposition.
Well, that is the decision of the creditors, Your Honor.
Yes. So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Tirona, is it correct to say may hirap na po nating i-locate or i-put in place kung ano ba yung naging benta ng Lopez Group of Companies dun sa loans within Liman? Kasi ang pwede lang po natin makita is from DBP to Liman, Liman to sa inyo, sa pagsettle nyo ng loans, but as to how you exited each and every company, if ever you exited, kasi yung iba naman po hindi kayo nag-exit, medyo mas komplikado na ho yung usapin doon.
Well, yung sa Maynilad at sa Bayan Tel po, nandun po naman sa rehabilitation plans nila lahat ng actions na ginawa po yan for our exit po.
Yes, yes. Pero hindi ho natin magawa na apples and apples eh. Magkano nyo binili sa Liman, na-settle sa Liman, at magkano yung inyong pagkakabenta? Kasi kung ang pagkakabenta nyo 1.6B, edi tama po si Secretary Harry Roque. Parang ang sinasabi po kasi Secretary Roque, kumita si Lopez, kumita si Liman, pero si DBP lugi. Yun po yung kanyang thesis nung pinakita niya yung presentation.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to correct that hindi ho kumita ang Lopez transaction po. Nalugi pa nga po. Doon sa Bayan Tel, for example, ang write-off po namin sa investment namin sa Bayan Tel ay umabot ng 19 billion. Yung sa Maynilad, ang write-off po namin ay 4.4 billion. That was for both equity and advances in Maynilad. So if that is what you were asking about the exit, that cost the group of companies 19 billion and 4.4 billion respectively, Your Honor.
Well, Mr. Tirona, for the record, kasi po yung binabanggit ninyo is the transaction itself na parang sinabi ninyo, ito yung Bayan Tel, nalugi kayo. Tapos po dito sa Maynilad, of course, maraming naging problema on collections, gumawa kayo ng mga piping, rehabilitation and all that, and nagka-problema kayo. Pero I'm not speaking on, kasi ako, on my part, I cannot say kung ano yung naging benefit from the Liman to where you sold it. Pero I guess si Secretary Roque was talking about the 1.6 billion. Yung loan po na nakuha ninyo at yung binayaran ninyo. Yun siguro po yung sinasabi niyang gain supposedly. Other than that, I cannot see how we can put together the gains in selling these loans, Mr. Tirona.
I don't have any comment on that, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maraming salamat po, Mr. Tirona.
Thank you, Honorable Defensor. A few questions for DBP on the submission of your required documents for today. Previously at the first hearing, you told us that there were 2,000 borrowers that fall part of the 9.6 billion SPAV availment. But the list that you provided, there is only less than 200 there are less than 200 companies here. So what happened to the 1,800?
Mr. Chair, may I explain?
Yes.
Yes, there were more than 7,000, almost 7,000 accounts sold to SPV. However, only the names submitted, only those are corporations and conglomerates as required by the subpoena, Mr. Chair. The rest are individuals and therefore not covered by the subpoena, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So are we okay with that? There are 2,000 borrowers. These are the only companies because the subpoena says companies and
Mr. Chair, if I recall, it was the Honorable Garbin who requested documents. I only seconded or amended it to issue a subpoena, but I'm not sure the intent. Because yung sa amin po, yung resolution, very clear naman po na nakatuon dito sa, this was again, a resolution last year at nakatuon po dun sa Lopez loan.
so with regards to the list, can you further provide the committee the top 5? Because I went over the list for the 2006 SPAV availment, and I only noticed around 4 big companies. So I do not want to prejudge which is the biggest among the, or is the Lopez Group the biggest among the 9.6? Are they the 4 biggest companies or in the top 10?
They're among the biggest, Mr. Chair.
They're among the biggest.
Yes, sir. May I just correct the figure I gave earlier?
Yeah.
There are 2,775 accounts.
Yes, but you only gave here less than 200.
Yes, sir, because those are the only
Companies.
corporations and conglomerates in that portfolio, sir. The rest are individuals.
What is the average of those 2,700 accounts? What is the average loan principal outstanding? What is the average amount?
Mr. Chair, we regret that we do not have the information at this time.
Yes, because we cannot we can further digest this submission until we see who are the top corporations that availed of the loans. Yeah. So can we get the amounts? Can we get the amounts corresponding to these 100 plus companies?
We can provide it in the next hearing.
Yeah. Please do both for the 7.5 billion present day and for the 9.56 2006. Thank you. So,
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Honorable Defensor.
Yes, to be fair with Mr. Robosa, because earlier we had an exchange on this issue, may I ask him, Mr. Robosa, are you still there in Zoom? Is Mr. Robosa?
Nasa restroom daw si ano.
Okay, so we can wait. Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Honorable Defensor.
Yes. Because it would seem to me.
Is there already daw in Zoom?
Okay, Mr. Bosa, are you there?
Yes, sir. At your service po.
Mr. Bosa, kasi po kayo nagtataka, for the past several hearings, hindi naman kayo nagsasalita about the eligibility. Ngayon po nagsalita na kayo dito at nagklaro kayo ng mga puntos.
Yes, sir.
So that is your position, Mr. Bosa?
That's right, sir. My position is, and I don't know how the BSP upholds this, but I've heard them say it, that the certificate of eligibility only gives the tax exemption. Because at the time of the 2006, there was a secondary market through which not only DBP, but all the other banks were able to sell, to dispose of their NPL po. And as far as I'm concerned, there were a lot of transactions that did not have the privilege po of the COE. So in other words, all of those transactions, by inference, I believe, are not illegal. They just didn't have the benefit of the tax exemption, which the certificate of eligibility that the BSP gives grants them po. So I guess there were a lot of transactions. I was in the private sector at that time. And private sector po yan. And I guess it bounds also the GFIs. It was not an illegal act po. If you had, di ho ba, ang COE. Kaya meron no tayong dalawang Lopez transactions that had the benefit of the COE for which we got some tax exceptions. And there were the two others na wala po. But that's, to me, is not an illegal act po. And I don't know, maybe we could ask BSP to clarify because I heard their statement. I can't even understand it. Thank you po, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Bosa, okay naman po ako dun eh. Kasi tama naman kayo. Again, I reiterate, ang private sector is allowed. So, wag na natin mag-argue. Ang sabi naman po ng Bangko Sentral, sabi niya, hindi, pag walang compliance, wala. Pero sabi din, sige, if you do that, may eligibility. Simple lang naman po ang tanong ko, Mr. Bosa, you are the head of one of the biggest financial institutions, if not the biggest of the government financial institutions. Bakit hindi niyo po kausapin ng presidente at ipaliwanag kung ganyan ang inyong paniniwala? Bakit po tayo nagpapagod dito? Dahil ang view ko po, ang aking pong pananaw, and I hope this could be tested in court, mag-file ng case talaga, bawal. Bawal ho. Tama ho kayo, sa private sector pwede. Siyempre kami naman dito, nandito lang naman kami sa mababang kapulungan. Kayo po'y direkto dyan. Andyan po si Chairman Romulo, Secretary Dominguez, Senior Finance Secretary. Ba't hindi niyo po pag-usapan kung ano tong kaso na to? Because the President has been talking about this 3 years ago. Yun po, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you po. Honorable Mike, maraming salamat po dyan sa guidance po ninyo. And I really appreciate our dialogue today and also with due respect also for our chairman for forgive me if sometimes I interject. Thank you po sa inyo lahat.
Thank you. Okay. Well, yes, Mr. Chairman, I just like to clarify, this has been the statement of the President for 3 years. And in 2011, this was stated during the investigation of the Senate. Mr. Bosa, is it not true that there are other government offices conducting a study on this matter?
At this point in time, sir?
Yes. I mean, maybe within the year, may gumawa po ng pag-aaral tungkol dito.
Saan po? Sa Lopez loans po?
Yes, the Lopez loans at yung pong 9 billion. The Lopez loans.
Sir, kasi sir, alam niyo sir, tapos na transaction na po yan eh. Ever since I got into DBP, which is almost 3 years no, hindi ko na pag-usapan po na yan eh. Until of course, this is brought up.
Yes, I'm sorry, President Bosa. So wala pong gumagalaw at nag-aaral ng particular sitwasyon na to from the executive?
I cannot say because I'm only just a member of the. You mean the executive branch of the government, yes, or as in DBP?
The executive branch of government, Mr. Bosa.
You know, sir, I'm just confined as to my role as president and CEO of DBP po. So to my knowledge, Honorable Mike, I cannot say what is going on beyond me.
Thank you, Mr. Bosa. Kasi po, nabanggit ko again yan because I'm referring to the statement of Secretary Roque. That was a detailed study. Yung binanggit po ni Mr. Manyala ngayong umaga, na ngayon lang natin nalaman, yung exact figures, was already being presented by Secretary Roque. And nung una, hindi ko alam kung saan nanggaling yun, but now I realize
Nanggaling po yun sa, may mga data siya na nakikita. And again, I reiterate the fact na ang Pangulo nagsalita na po dito dati pa. Diba? And, you know, all I'm asking is, we do not make a judgment. Although may position po ako, my personal position was that illegal po yun. Yung certificate of eligibility, hindi kayo nakuha, illegal yun. If you sold it in another process, in another way, kung iba po yung pamamaraan, pwede po yun. Kasi yun nga po sa gobyerno, medyo mas maigpit sa atin. Ngayon ang Pangulo nagsasalta na rin dati pa ng ganyan. Diba? Na sinasabi niya nga, at ito pinaliwanag na namin, yung 6 bilyon na pagkalugi, hindi siya write-off, hindi siya condemnation. Pero yung pagkakalugi talaga ng gobyerno. Ngayon it would seem na ibang posisyon ng DBP or meron kayong ibang posisyon, you explain it to the President. Diba? It should not be a burden of this committee to make a study and then you have a different interpretation of what should transpire. Diba? Dahil ang Pangulo mismo nagsalita dito and dito was a take-off ng ABS-CBN hearing. Now, we are independent of the President. Pero at least kung mapaliwanag nyo sa kanila, magkakaintindihan tayo kung ano talaga yung naging proseso. Now, Mr. Chairman, having said that, I maintain the position that the committee should not only, kasi po I understand the Ombudsman is already conducting its study now from what I've heard, but the committee should not only make a legislative recommendation, magkaroon po tayong rekomendasyon ng legislation, but as what the Honorable Remulla and the rest of us discussed before sa PhilHealth deliberations, that we file a case so that to test, because in the FIS law, at yung po yung nakakatakot, there may be, again, abuses of the SPV law. Maraming salamat, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Honorable Defensor. Before we proceed, let me further acknowledge the presence of members, Representative Tony Petalabano, Representative Sharon Garin, Vice Chair Jake Villa, Deputy Majority Leader John Marvin Nieto, Deputy Majority Leader Crystal Bagatsing, Deputy Speaker D.V. Savillano. Let me ask the President of DBP, Mr. Herbosa.
Sir.
Hello, sir.
Hello, sir.
Yes, good morning. And I've noticed the submission of the list that you gave us, the list of companies for 2006, from 1999 to 2006, amounting to 9.6 billion, and from 2007 to the current year, amounting to 7.5 billion. So my question is this: why is it a systematic result that happens in the DBP has a very high. I asked you this before, remember the first hearing, but I'm asking you again now that it's like we're expecting a big loss in a 15 years of operation, 13 to 15 years of operation. You will expect a loss of between 7.5 to 9.8 billion. So,
to our honorable members, joining us via Zoom is the following members. We have the Majority Leader, Honorable Ferdinand Martin Romualdez. We have Representative Adrian Edcas, Representative Yasser Balindong, Representative Siriaco Gato Jr.
Subscribe to SMNI News Channel and turn on notification button for more news updates.